All right, so next up, we're going to take some of what we've learned around CSS transforms and transitions, plus a couple of other properties we've seen along the way, to build a very simple but somewhat effective little CSS hover button effect thing. So it's just a button, but when you hover over it, it rises off the page a tiny bit. Obviously, it's not supposed to be incredibly impressive. It's just a nice effect, and you'll see things like this employed all over the place. Maybe not exactly this, shape and this color and this exact shadow and exact font and all of that, but you'll see a lot of very slight interaction effects on websites when you hover over something. When you click a button, or when you're about to click a button, when you hover over a menu, a nav bar, these sort of things play an important role. I'm no UI designer or any sort of designer, but even I can tell you that providing that sort of feedback to a user that you're hovering, that this is an interactable thing, makes for a better experience. Okay, so there is starter code for this video. Here's what it looks like when you run it in the browser. Stunning. It's literally just a button in the body. There's one reason I gave you starter code, which is that I also gave you a font. Now, we haven't talked about fonts yet, and Google Fonts, that's coming up in just a couple of videos from now, but I just decided, to make this look as nice as possible, I'll give you a font. So that's there, and that's really the only reason that it's there. And then the CSS file uses that font and applies it to the body. It's called Roboto. So that one line right here is linking to a font. If you get rid of that, then you won't be able to use Roboto. So we're actually going to start with a bit of advanced cheating stuff that we haven't talked about yet. Just to get our button in the middle of the page vertically and horizontally, we're going to cheat and use Flexbox, which is something we have not yet covered. We're going to move on to that in just a couple of videos. So for now, just wipe this from your memory. Don't ask any questions, okay? I'm kind of kidding, but also you're going to have questions if this is new to you. And we're going to cover them all in a couple of videos. It will all make sense. And right now, it probably won't make any sense. So I'm going to set display to flex, align dash items to center, and justify dash content to center. 3 properties we really haven't seen. Well, we've seen display, but not the value of flex. If I refresh, did I mess something up here? Oh, I forgot to set the height of 100 VH, 100 view height units, viewport height. Okay, so now we have a button centered vertically and horizontally. I'm also going to give a background color to my body. So background dash color of, I have this written down, I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere, 1F1B29, obviously. And there we are. Okay, so that's it for the body styles. Remember, don't worry about any of this stuff with Flexbox. Next up, we're going to add some basic styles to our button pre-hover. Just make it look like this button does before we hover over it. So what we're going to do is set on the button background just to be none. Get rid of that default ugliness. And there it is. Now we do have this lovely border we also want to get rid of. I'm going to set the color of our button to another color I just have in front of me. It is a hex color FFA260, sort of a light orangey color. There it is. I'll just stay zoomed in here. Then we're going to set the border to be 2 pixels and solid instead of that. I think the default is like inset. Is that what it's called? Yeah, inset. That makes it look like that 3D effect, a very poor 3D effect. I'm going to make it a solid border. There it is. And I'm going to add some spacing in there. So how would I do that? Just a quick little quiz here. If I want spacing on the inside, between the border, I'm zoomed in. There we go. So they don't look quite the same. But how do I add that spacing there? It's padding. Padding between the content and the border. So I'm going to do padding and 1M on the top and bottom, 2 on the left and right. There we go. Looks all right. I'll also set the font size, font dash size to be 1M in this button just from the parent. That just makes it slightly larger, and it should scale as the body size changes, or whatever the parent is. And that's pretty much it for the basic button. Next, I'm going to work on what happens when we hover. So let's add in our basic hover selector there. And for now, just all buttons. There's only one on the page, so that works. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is just change the border color. And if you take a look at what we're going for, we give it this yellowy greenish, I think it's more of a yellowy color, when you hover. So just change the border color, and I have this color in front of me, F1FF5C. There we are. Let's go to our version. We'll hover. Cool. I also make the text white. So that's just regular color white. And that gives it, I think, I mean, you don't have to do this. You might want it to be that yellow color. But to me, it kind of makes it seem like it's glowing from within, especially once we add the box shadow down below, which I guess we'll do right now. So box shadows allow us to add a box shadow. There's box shadow and text shadow. I never remember the syntax for box shadows because, I mean, look at that. What is that? I can tell that this is the color of the shadow. That part's easy. If I change that to red, we get a red shadow. Now, I do know this because I just looked it up. We've got the X offset, the Y offset, the blur radius, and the spread radius, I believe. So if I change this, the spread radius, or let's do the blur radius to be like 10 pixels. Can you see how there's a lot more blur there? And then the spread radius will be 10 pixels. That's just how far things spread, I guess. I'm not sure what the terminology is, but you can always consult the documentation here. If you pass in 5 values, offset X, Y, blur radius, spread radius, and color. So I have a box shadow pre-written down, and it's just box dash shadow only when we hover. And it's going to be 0 for the X offset, and then 0.5 ems for Y, 0.5 ems for the blur, and negative 0.4 ems for the spread radius. And the color is exactly the same as the border, that yellowish color. Refresh, and we hover. Okay, there we are. It looks like it's lighting up. Now the next thing to do is make it move. Make it move upwards just a tiny bit when we hover. And we just talked about in the previous video, the best way to accomplish that in terms of performance is not to set a margin or something, but instead use transform. So to transform something, right, we have lots of options, but the one that we want, transform, the one transformation that we want is to translate. So we're not rotating or scaling or skewing or anything like that. We're just moving it. So translate, and we're really just moving it in one direction, which is up. So we can do translate Y. And then I need to pass in a value, and I'm going to do a small number like 0.25 ems. Now a positive number will actually move down, and that's not what I want. So I want a negative number, negative 0.25. Refresh, try again. And that's pretty much it for the properties we want to change when we hover. Now we just need to smooth it out, add a nice transition. And fortunately, we just learned about transitions, nice and easy. The simplest option is just to say transition all, even though I advised against doing all, we'll just start with that. And then you can play around with the duration. So I think 5 or 0.5 seconds is too long. Well, that's not it. That's the solution. Here's the one we're working on. That's just too slow. It feels like things are lagging and just bad. We don't want that. So I think 0.2 or 0.25 seconds at most. Again, I'm not a UI guy, I'm not a designer, but in my experience, you want something that's just on the edge of noticeable and not noticeable. You definitely don't want it to be distracting. So this makes it clear that you can interact with this, but we're not sitting here just waiting for the button to move so that we can click. It's very quick. So I think that works well. Like I've said, if you don't want to say transition everything, because potentially down the line you might have other properties and you don't want them to transition, you can list them all out like this. Just duplicate this border. Unfortunately, you do have to list them one at a time. You can't just say color, border color, 0.25 seconds. You have to have a pair. So I've got box shadow. And is there anything else? Yes, transform. Transform. Like that, and we shouldn't notice a difference. And we don't. Another thing I would do is add in a change to the cursor when you hover to make it clear that you can interact with this button, because it doesn't look like the default button. If we change that cursor to be a pointer, you'll see, you may have seen this, well, I'm sure you've seen this in the real world, where my cursor looks like a little gloved hand now, like a Mickey Mouse hand, versus the traditional just like triangle pointer. All right, and that just makes it clear that we can interact. So that's kind of it for our button. Yeah, I think it's somewhat effective. It's simple. Obviously, it's not an entire application yet, but it is something you can take and integrate into other apps. Tweak all the colors, tweak the shapes, the sizes, the durations, and come up with your own hover effects. And that's it for now. So a simple demonstration of some of the concepts we've been covering recently.